here, so I see everyone's finding their way to their seats, and that's fine. I want to welcome you to the third annual Churchill Club Women Tech Exec Roundtable. Tonight we come together as the strong community that we are, the diverse community that we are, and interact with, celebrate, and learn from some of the accomplished and amazing women leaders in our midst. We have with us Deborah Conrad, VP and GM of the Corporate Marketing Group at Intel. We have Cherie Gardiner, San Francisco Bay Area HR Director at Microsoft. We have Purnima Kochikar, VP who runs the developer community for Nokia. We have Aliza, Peleg, Planning and Operations VP for Better Place. And Susan Wojcicki, VP of Product Management at Google. Welcome and thank you all very much for being here. And I'd also like to welcome back Anne Winblad of Hummer Winblad Venture Partners as moderator. Thank you, Anne. Others to acknowledge tonight, first and foremost, Microsoft, who has opened their doors to us as a host and sponsor yet again, and we really appreciate it. Please help me thank Microsoft for making this program possible. And I would also like to welcome our co-hosts this evening, three important women-focused organizations. Representatives from each of them are here, and I encourage you to seek them out and learn more about their organizations before you leave here tonight if you have not done so already. Let me ask the representatives of Anita Borg Institute, Ostia, and the Forum for Women Executives and Entrepreneurs to just raise your hands if you would, please. Thank you. Very quickly, a few Churchill Club announcements about exciting programs coming up. Next week, May 4, when push turns to pull, with Tim O'Reilly leading a discussion with industry luminaries John Seely Brown and John Hagel. They take an aerial view based on extensive research of huge, as yet largely unseen fundamental changes and shifts that are enabled by digital technology. And they're going to talk about their implications for business and other key parts of our lives. And then on May 19, the members-only 12th annual Top 10 Tech Trends debate, one of our most popular programs. 5 leading venture capitalists are going to stick their necks out and predict the top trends that will take shape over the next 12 months. And you, the audience, will vote on the trends, and you will also vote on which of the 5 pundits will take home the prize of Trend Idol for the year. And then on May 24, a program soon to be posted featuring college-age entrepreneurs who have started amazing companies. For 24 years and counting, the Churchill Club has been the leading forum for the Bay Area business and technology community. We focus on what's new, what's next, what's not known. We're a nonprofit member-supported organization, and if you enjoy tonight's program and you're not a member, I do encourage you to consider joining us. It's easy to find us online and sign up at churchillclub.org. And finally, my last announcement, if you are tweeting tonight, please do use # or hashtag Churchill Club, and you can check your program for other relevant Twitter codes for tonight. And now I'm very pleased to introduce our moderator, Anne Winblad. Anne is a legend in the tech industry. She's the co-founder and a managing director of Hummer Winblad Venture Partners, a leading venture capital firm focused on software investing. And they recently celebrated their 20th anniversary. And Anne, a very strong influence in her early life was her father, who actually passed away at 86 in October. He was a star athlete and winning high school basketball coach. And growing up as the oldest of 6 kids, and they never really had bedtime stories. What her dad did was, especially during basketball season, he had a chalkboard and he went through the plays he had his team working on. And he focused on 3 lessons. And I think it's naturally now how Anne sees life. First of all, it's not about you. It's how well you work as a team. Second, you can be a natural athlete, but you have to have a winning game plan. And finally, you always have to hustle. Anne will lead the conversation tonight, but she also has license to add her own insights and observations as well. Please, let's give a warm welcome to Anne Winblad.
Well, welcome everybody, and again, thanks to the Churchill Club and all of our sponsors for putting together this event. The timing for this panel, Karen, who is behind the idea of this panel, which started 3 years ago, is pretty impeccable. And always, right before the panel, there's some big article about women. And on April 16th, there was a New York Times article, and the title was "Out of the Loop in Silicon Valley." The article started with a typical reporter's woe is me story that runs annually. That women only own 40% of private companies. Women own 40% of private companies, but only 8% of venture-backed startups are run by women. There was also data in there that women account for 6% of CEOs of the top 100 tech companies, and 22% of engineers and 14% of VCs. I thought that was actually really great news relative to how it's been before. So once you've been called a legend in this industry, that means you've been around for more than 20 years in the same job. So those were good stats to me. So we're here today for our third year of the Churchill Club Women's Panel, and tonight we're showcasing 5 amazing women. They've all agreed to talk about their careers, their lives, their views of Silicon Valley, and how they're leading the Valley to its next phase. Some are young in their careers, some proven vets that are leaders in semiconductor, telecom, energy, internet, and core software. Other than biotech, we represent all aspects of Silicon Valley and what Silicon Valley can become. Deborah is a veteran of the Valley and at Intel is now the CMO. Purnima has spent only 6 years in Silicon Valley and is now a vice president at Nokia. Aliza has had leading roles at Apple, SciTech, and SAP, and is at heart an entrepreneur, but she's left her post at software and she claims she's now in a better place in an energy company. Susan is one of the new Silicon Valley success stories, probably one of the most recent Cinderellas, as we call them. She joined Google right out of college. Do not read the program. I think this is an attempt by Microsoft to cause her to... she did not house... Bill and Paul Allen in a garage. It was Larry and Sergey. And she's had a starring role at Google, starting with her first project, a little project called AdSense, which is 31% of Google's revenues, at least as of last $5.4 billion quarter. So her contribution just in one product line is bigger than most companies. And last but not least, Cherie is the Director of Talent and Organizational Development at the little company up north with a lot of people here in the Valley called Microsoft. So she's going to tell us what it's like to work in that locker room. So just to get us warmed up and to remind us we have leaders of industry here, I'm going to ask each of our panelists what their current view of the state and future of Silicon Valley is. We've just come out of a recession. And, so everybody's got kind of a fresh lens on where we're going. Deborah?
I've been in the Valley for such a long time, it's hard to get perspective sometimes. But the thing that's always so amazing to me that has been consistent the whole time is just this drive for innovation and this desire to be doing something new. And I've been at Intel for a very long time, but still that's probably our biggest passion is always looking for the next new thing. And I don't feel that that's changing in any way in the Valley. I think there's more energy here and more excitement, especially with the economy coming back on and the lights coming back on this year. There's technology is always going to be this great innovation engine, and people who are attracted to that are going to come here first. So I don't see a real change in the energy level. In fact, it's actually quite inspiring.
Cherie?
Well, I'm new to the Valley, so I've been here now for...
You can only use that as an answer to one question.
Okay, that's right, I promise. So I'm new to the Valley, and I came with a certain set of beliefs about what to expect, and I arrived around about the time when the economy was, obviously having its impact, which many of us have felt. And I have been struck, actually, especially working for a company like Microsoft, which of course, has a lot of innovative energy, I would say, and was at some level excited to see the reaction from our employee base, but on another level, disappointed. And there's a part of me that really hoped to see more spirit and more excitement about what the opportunity represented. But what I have seen, and in fact there are a few people in the audience here tonight from Microsoft, I have seen the uprising of extraordinary talent at this time. Like in times of battle, in times of difficulty, you see people rise out of the weeds, and that's what I've seen. So that's been obvious to me.
Well, I would love to, echo both these sentiments. Working for Nokia, which is a Finnish company in the Valley, and I'm pretty new to the Valley. It's like 6 years now. There's two things that come up. One is that the Valley will always emerge in the next new thing. And, I think Aliza will tell us that the next new thing is, around the corner. And you will find people just jump in with their full heart. And there'll be people like Anne who will fund the dreams to make that happen, because you need both. You need creativity and investment. But the one thing that I find very fascinating is that the Valley now is also looking at what they can do at a global level. It's not so much as just making an impact in terms of writing a business plan and making it big, but what is the real impact across the world? And I think that's a very big new impression.
I too have to share the experience and the feedback that the people before me have given. I think we are in a very lucky situation. We've embarked not only to get me to a better place, we've embarked on a journey to get everyone to a better place. Talking about the global impact. It is definitely an audacious goal, and it's very big. And I think we are attracting, even though we're very small, we make a lot of noise, but we see a lot of excitement. We see a lot of excitement from the financial community. We see a lot of excitement from the older generation who've maybe used the recession or the gap in saying, I don't really want to do this anymore. I need to look for something that makes an impact, or something for my heart, or something for my spirit, or for my stomach. So actually we're finding people who are interested in something a little bit different than all the careers, all the years that they've had in the career. And we're also finding a lot of it from students and very youngsters who are literally willing to do more and work for less and be a part of something that has an impact and a difference. So I think that we're just incredibly fortunate to drive a few waves in parallel. So the green and the clean and the environment, which is a very big element, the national security, it's a very big element. There was even an attempt about Silicon Valley being the new Detroit. So there are a lot of innovative automotive companies here.
That's scary.
And
That's scary.
And their labs. Many Mercedes and BMW have development labs here in Silicon Valley. Things that we knew nothing about the automotive industry. Obviously, a distant company for us. Tesla is sort of a distant relative. So there's a lot of excitement around taking initiative, and we just had a few trends meet. People's motivations to have something with a spirit and an impact, the crisis in the automotive industry, and trying to maybe reinvent some of it here in Silicon Valley, and people wanting to make an impact on all its generations. So I think we've seen a lot from here, and we've heard from around the world that probably to be so bullish and so disruptive, you probably have to come from Silicon Valley. So actually we've gotten a lot of recognition, and we want to spread that further.
So my view, and I'll just start by saying I actually grew up in Silicon Valley, so it's very different than it was when I was a kid. I mean, really, this was all orchards, and if you look in some of the old neighborhoods, you can see the remnants of those orchards where there are now homes. But I think at what we're seeing now is I see a huge opportunity for innovation across all the fields, and you see that represented here on the panel. And I see the opportunity really accelerating in terms of number of ways that we can use technology to continue to fuel and to make people's lives better. And one of the things I've really enjoyed about being from Silicon Valley and growing up here is it's brought so many people from all over the world, and I think, again, this room is representative of that, who all share the common dream of how can we use technology in a way to build new industries and build new businesses. And I think it makes it a really fantastic place for us all to live.
So Aliza, a couple of years ago, I was racing into the Lufthansa flight lounge in Munich to stand in line at the shower room and hopeful that I could take a shower before I went to my next meeting in another city in Europe, and the person in front of me was you. And
It's all about timing.
it's all about timing. You're right. You're right. And instead of us saying, "Gee, what are we doing here? What's wrong with our lives?" We just said, "How long is it going to take you to take your shower?" I didn't get my shower, so that's answered. But
not because mine was too long.
I know. Okay. So, tell us about 24 hours in your life.
Well, you can see the wrinkles and the dark. And, I think it really is 24, and it really is 7. But I think it's part of embracing it. You can fight it, or you can sort of embrace it. And I think that I was fortunate, and I think my family, or I'm fortunate that my family accepted it too. So I believe that it's part of my life. I'm always grateful if there's a shower, because the alternative was to do the same trip and not have a shower, right? You can always look at the glass empty,
That's
half
the difference
empty.
between men and women.
Right. So so it's looking for the small opportunities to freshen up. It's looking to the opportunity of not sort of bitching too much about the next trip or the next flight, but what are the opportunities that are going to come out of the next trip or the next flight? And I think really accepting with a lot of, and not out of a compromise, but out of a choice that this is the life that I'm embarked in. And I think I'd be lying if I said that there isn't the moment where I say, shit, what's wrong with this picture, right? Why is it that my whole family is watching a movie and I'm in my office emailing away? Or why is someone on a trip and I'm not? Or, so it's not perfect. There are some compromises, but in general, I think it goes a lot with our industries, with our innovation, with our desire to be upfront, with our desire to be time to market, that I think it's a bit that comes with the territory. And I think finding those compromises, and if it's a shower, I was very grateful for that one.
So, Susan, tell us what you did in the last 24 hours. Take us through your typical day, or yesterday.
So I guess I'll say one thing a little bit different between the two of us is I actually try to separate my work life from my home life. And I actually think I would probably go crazy if I was working 24 hours. And so, I'm trying to remember what I did. My life sort of becomes a little bit of a blur in terms of what did I actually do yesterday. But I will say I have 4 kids, and I try to be home by 6 or 7. And actually, organizing, I feel like the weird thing for me is I feel like I'm alternating between my life and like all these, important things that I need to do, and then I come home and I'm the assistant of my children, and I need to like make sure that my son went on a gold rush trip and that his stuff is packed, because if it isn't, then I'm really in trouble. And so my life alternates between work, which is really, really intense and really busy, and I have meetings, and I am doing a whole bunch of different things, and then I'm coming home and I'm having to deal with life at home. And then after my kids go to bed, I try to, because a lot happens at work between 6 and 9 p.m. at night, I log on and I'm barraged by all the stuff that happened, and I catch up, and then I'm back in the office in the morning after dropping off my kids.
Purnima?
Well,
Can you remember yesterday?
Well, when you work for Nokia, the time zones blur and merge. So you don't know when a day starts and ends, because you don't know whether you're in a Finnish time zone or in the Silicon Valley time zone, and now whether it is in the Asian time zone. So it's one long continuum. But
do you speak Finnish?
I don't speak Finnish, but the Finns speak English because they said nobody else would speak to them otherwise, because Rika can tell me about it. But the one thing I think, I'm more like Susan in the sense of I try to find my sanity in the middle of all of this. And so, I use some really simple things, and my husband who's here will tell me that I manage to do it about 25% of the time. But the rules are that, make time for what matters. And it doesn't matter when it is. So for example, if you have to work out and between 3 and 4 in the afternoon is the only time you have, find your time in the gym. If you have to call your mom, right? Make time. And as I said, I succeed 25% of the time. Make do. Don't beat yourself up. Make do. And one of my favorite stories, if I may share, Billie Hartless is one of the VPs of HR at Nokia. And the story she told me is one of my favorite, women trying to balance things stories. She was saying that she was on the road for like 5 weeks straight. She gets home. She has a little girl, 11 years old. She thinks, oh my God, I've not seen her in such a long time. So she's sitting on the swing, her little girl on her lap, and she says, you know that you are one of the most important things in my life. And you know that mommy really cares about you. And the little girl turns to her and says, you're the second most important thing in my life. Okay? And so Billie says all kinds of things rush through her head, thinking, oh, she's going to say her dad because he's the primary caregiver, all kinds of things, right? And she says, I shouldn't ask this, but before she knows, she says, what is the most important thing, And she says, water, of course, we can't live without water. So make do. People understand that you can't be there at all the time. So make do, right? So, and the last thing, if everything fails, meditate.
Absolutely.
So.
Well, that's a nice starting point for me because this morning I did meditate, which is one of my new practices that I'm getting a lot of enjoyment and relief from, actually, because like everyone on the panel, I have back-to-back meetings every day, working on budgets, making decisions. You move from facilitating a meeting to participating in a meeting. You move from planning a meeting to driving an outcome for another conversation. So it varies, really dramatically. But I think I'm at an interesting point in my career, maybe different than a lot of the women here, and that is I'm not yet married. I'm getting married later this year. I don't have children yet. But I'm just starting the conversation with my future husband. What is that going to look like? He has a very flourishing career, as I do, and we're having those tough conversations. What is it going to look like? And right now we're starting to plan or starting to think about how we're going to negotiate. So I know it sounds kind of crazy, but we're using whatever spare time we have to say, how would we handle this if we had a child? How would we make these trade-offs if one of us has to be at a meeting or one of us needs to be away this weekend for a work conference? So we're at an earlier stage in both of our careers, and hopefully I'm taking advice from you women here tonight that will help me.
So Susan, did you work out a contract with your husband, or did you just wing it with the forkhead?
We just kind of wing it. I think if you plan too much, you can't anticipate all the things that you need to do. So. But I don't know, we just find somehow every day, like sometimes actually we are working it out that morning. Like, actually I just called him. I was like, by the way, did you know I'm not coming home till later? And he was like, oh, really? I was like, good thing I called and reminded you, because so we really sort of do it ad hoc.
So, my last 24 hours wasn't particularly glamorous. I was telling these folks earlier, I have my global staff in town for the week, so I've been sitting in a conference room literally for 4 days, which is not that exciting, sort of drains your energy out of it. But, honestly, at the end of the day yesterday, I got up and left an event that we were doing to go get my son, who's 11, and pick him up and take him to dinner, and we go do homework, and we just sort of hang out. And it's a very slow, normal routine. And then I do what Susan does, is I check back in for my second shift around 9 o'clock. But that time is just amazing for me because it turns into my meditation and talking about Pokemon and all kinds of crazy things. It just is completely different than my normal day. And so I treasure that time because it really forces me to just think about my bigger life. And really, for me, it's really about choices. I try to be as engaged as possible all day, every day, which is exhausting. And in every meeting I'm in or in every conversation I'm in, I try to be as present as I can be. And by the end of the day, I try and give that to my son because I don't want him to not have that part of me. So there are times that it can be exhausting, but at the same time, it's very fulfilling because I feel like I get an awful lot out of my day. I'm a bit 24/7 as well. I would be very sensitive if my son said I was second in his life.
Actually, I'd be thrilled. Boy, would I be thrilled.
Yeah. So, but work-life balance and all those things. For me, it's always comes down to the choices and the priorities that we make. And sometimes I make good choices, and sometimes I don't.
So one question I always hate, and people always ask me this when I'm on some sort of panel or there's Q&A, is this question, can you have it all? And I hate that question. Yeah. But we were talking about that question earlier, and somebody said, what is all? So what's all? Who wants to say what all is? And what's all in your life?
So whenever I get that question, I always ask, like if I get it from a reporter, I'll say like, well, did you ask the last male executive that you interviewed? Did you ask them that same question? Because I feel at the end of the day, like both of us work, we both have kids, and like it's up to us to sort of figure it out. And I really have approached my life from the sense of like I kind of didn't think about it. I just had kids, and I joined Google when I was pregnant, and it was a really small company, which was kind of a crazy move at the time. But I just thought, look, it's really not going to matter. We're going to find a way to work through it. And so I think having all means being able to, do what you want to do in your life, whether it's having kids or not having kids, or working or not having kids, and getting fulfillment out of that, and not feeling like there's something you wanted to do that you couldn't do.
Yeah, I would like to add on that. I think there's a perceived sense of what all is for women, and or for everyone really. But I think it's important that we play our own role of defining what success means, and often that means redefining what success is, because often the definition of success has been defined for you by either the company you work for, or by your peers, or by your friends. And so for me, I think it's a courageous act to actually say, this is what success looks like for me, or this is what all looks like for me. And you know what? I'm great with that. And I think, as I'm struggling with decisions about how I grow my career and how much am I willing to sacrifice, if you want to call it that, I'm asking myself those questions. And I think they're important questions to ask for men and women.
Well, Purnima, you actually, early in your career, sort of balanced, a career and community service. I'm on the board of trustees of my university, and one thing I've noticed is that if you're graduating from college or university now, no one graduates without putting community service in their undergraduate degree. And how, some of you are younger, some of us, we never thought about doing community service. We just got right into that job. I'm looking at you. Yeah. So do you think it's possible to sort of balance and put community service, into your palette early on?
Yeah, I in my case, I didn't think I had a choice. I'll be a fourth generation teacher if I go into teaching. Doing something for your community around you was considered more, again, it's how you define success. I think every person comes from a background of how success is defined, and for me, if I didn't have some kind of an impact over the society or the people around me, if I didn't touch lives, it didn't matter what title I had. So for me, it was something necessary, like breathing, like working out. So you put it into you made time. However, I think that sometimes lends perspective. That's the most important thing. Like, it lends perspective. It shows you how much you have to be grateful for. It also makes you really humble of how little you're really doing. It keeps you grounded. You can easily get caught up in these nebulous things like titles and things around you. But when you go out there and you see there's such a big problem like education around, and you're not even touching that much, so it's a good balance. It's a good balance to keep you grounded, but at the same time, it's a good balance to say that you're making an impact outside.
And Susan, Google sort of built that into their culture from the beginning. Do you want to comment about that? Since you were employee number 16, you were part of building that culture.
Yeah, I think a couple of ways we've tried to build that in. I think one of the things that is unique about Google is that we've felt a lot of times that the products and the services that we've done have really enabled people to do things they wouldn't have been able to do otherwise. And we get stories back about what people can do with the products that have been really powerful. But aside from that, we also have Google.org, and Google.org has a number of different initiatives where they try to use technology and the know-how that we have, which I think is an important point, that as a corporation, and a lot of us work at companies, that corporations can do a lot of social good too. It doesn't always have to be in a nonprofit perspective. And the knowledge that you have within a company, sometimes like how to build a network, for example, and you bring that to a third world, or to bring that to a country where they're developing the network, can be very valuable. And so that's one of the things that we have tried to do. And we have a lot of initiatives where people have 20% time to be able to work on things that they see as important for them.
I'd just like to add something about the all, because I think we got, I just want to actually echo some of the words that even I was inspired by what you said about the humbling experience in the social or in the community work. But I do think that the all goes back to a self-definition. Okay, and we're only as happy as we are if we felt that we're fulfilling our own choices and our own definitions, and I think that, and it's really, and you need to work it out with yourself, with your spouse if you've got kids, with your helper if you've got nannies or pairs or whatever. There's a lot of balancing that you have to do, but the all is really about you making those choices, and not necessarily what your mother-in-law may have thought are the right choices.
I want to add something on community service. At Intel, it's such a big part of our culture to give back. It's a kind of a quiet part of our culture, and so while I don't have things that I do outside of the company, at the same time, within the company, we do an awful lot of community outreach, especially with kids, kindergarten through 8th grade, math and science education, women in particular, or young girls, and also just general community volunteering. And so it's been through my journey working there as long as I have that I didn't start off, I was more like you described, Anne, just 24/7 work, and I didn't think of community service as being an important part of my career or even just my own makeup. But through the years, it's become a huge part of what I do, and it's very much the give back and the perspective that you get, which is so inspiring on so many levels. It's just very fulfilling day in and day out.
So one of the questions that I get a lot of calls where people say, could I come in and talk about my career, and what should I do next? So I took a look at everybody's bios, and Deborah, you've pretty much been at the same job for 24 years, although you
same
are...
company, not same job.
Same career. Not the same job for sure. I mean, you're a leader of the company. Susan, even you went from the garage to Google almost 12 years ago. You said 12 years this week. Aliza, I counted 6 different companies on your bio, so you sound more like the typical Silicon Valley.
I'm old.
Okay, Purnima, you're younger. I counted 5 on yours. Cherie, you were at a record company, EMI, before Microsoft. There seems to be a perception when I talk to a lot of women that you should sort of stay at a company, get almost fully vested, and then go to find the next one, so you can sort of have a portfolio of investment in Silicon Valley. Talk about staying at the same company and growing your career in one place for 24 years, or how fast those 12 years are changing industries, Aliza and Cherie, or doing different things in different continents. What are your thoughts about this? We've got every kind of flavor of how you manage your career here.
I'll dive in. I have an attention span this big, and I've been lucky to work it's not just at a company, there's a culture where I work, and that I'm able to go do and pursue things that are interesting to me. And if I look at my career, the arc of my career at Intel, it's not 24 years at one place. It's 24 years in a culture that has grown. The company has changed significantly in that time. Our industry has changed, 4 times over in that time. I've spent 6 years overseas. I mean, I've done so many different things, and that's probably the big theme is I've always been able to pursue the thing that I wanted to do next.
Did you ever almost write your resignation?
I resigned several times. Absolutely.
Just to
Absolutely.
yourself?
No. With tears, the whole bit. You do get to a point where you question everything, and it's. I don't think that's unique to being at one company. That's just you're at a crossroads, and you're trying to decide what's next and what's important. And
what about when those headhunters call you? That a woman in a leadership position. That you must.
Sometimes they're very interesting. But I'm part of a family. And we were talking about this earlier. As I've gone through my journey at Intel, I've worked with the same group of people for a very long time, and it's almost like being in a startup, and you kind of grow your way through it. And so I don't see it as if I were to consider something beyond what I'm doing today or beyond the company, it would have to be not just a great job opportunity, but also just this X factor of, can I have impact? Can I make change? Every day I go home and think, did I actually do something today? Did I make a difference? And it's not just did I add, to the bottom line or save money or, grow market share. We actually, feel like we make a difference in the world. And so the jobs that I've had have always been, I think, for me, have been very fulfilling and very satisfying. And I haven't felt like I needed to go beyond that because every challenge that I've wanted to go for, I was able to go do. But there have been times that I definitely questioned it, for sure.
So I actually spent most of my 20s and after I graduated from college, I was at a bunch of different companies. I was at a small startup that failed. I was at a management consulting firm. I worked in Costa Rica. I worked in India. So I actually spent a lot of time just trying out lots of different things. And I kind of began to wonder, am I capable of staying in a company for more than 2 years? Because I didn't seem to be able to do that. And so I think for me, but I've now been at Google for almost 12 years. And so I think what was really good was I was able to experiment a lot in my 20s and figure out what I liked and what I didn't like. And then when I found Google, I knew that there was so much opportunity that I could grow with the company. And so I think actually one advice I've given a lot of people is to find industries or companies that are growing. I think it's much easier to advance faster in a growing area or with a growing company than it is, obviously with one that's shrinking, where it's much harder. But also to know the right times to, to leave and the right times to stay, which are hard to always know. But but for me, clearly the other opportunities were not the right ones, and Google, because it was growing and the company was changing so much, and there were so many opportunities to do new things, and also I'm similar to Deborah, in where I really feel like this is part of a team, of a family that I really enjoy being a part of, and that's a big part of the motivation for me as well.
I would say another factor in the decision-making process is really getting clear on whether you really want to choose a professional route. So if you have a goal to exceed or grow in marketing or finance or human resources or legal, sometimes it's not about staying in the same company. Sometimes it is about getting cross-industry experience, which will give you different perspectives. But one piece of advice that I always use a lot, at least within Microsoft, is really for people to think about the types of experiences that you need in order to grow your career successfully. And so that sometimes requires thinking about, what haven't I done? If I want to move into a general manager role, if I want to move into a broad business role, do I really understand finance? Do I really understand the operations part of the business? And if not, I need to spend a couple of years, or I need to dedicate some time to going deep in certain areas in order to build the building blocks of my career. So I always encourage people to think about the types of experiences, which often may take longer in terms of growing your career. You may have to do some lateral movement, but in time that will actually develop a richer, more holistic career. So I think about
We
it.
talk about that a lot at Intel. Lateral is the new up. Because you're building a pyramid, and the more you can build on your base, just as you've just described, the more experience you can have at your base, the more you're going to have better opportunities.
Well, in good companies, and again, I think sometimes Microsoft as well at this, and in other areas we're still learning, but a good company will say, we're not promoting you to a VP role until we've seen you do international work, until we've seen you lead a challenging product team in a startup business versus a more established business. So a good company will be encouraging that from their talent.
Yeah, I'm sure we have slightly different stories. I agree with the fact that if you're in a growing company, I never thought I was going to stay with Nokia for 6 years. And it's not what you think when you go in. Every December, this is a confession, I go through an existential crisis because another year has gone by. And that's the only thing you can't get back, right? You can go up in stock market, down, you can make money, lose money, gain weight, lose weight, everything else. But time, you can't get back.
That happens May 31st at Oracle. An inside joke.
At every December, I ask myself whether I should continue to spend the next minute on what I am doing, whether it's a worthwhile investment of time. And at Nokia so far, even though when I say 6 years, a lot of Valley people raise their eyebrows, when I say it's the 5th job in 6 years, I earn my stripes, you see. So it's also the culture around you as to what people think is the good thing to do. There's 2 things I do have to say. One is that it's easy to think just because you're working great in a particular environment that you're competitive in the market. So somehow you need to test that, whether you are competitive in the market, whether you're keeping your skills current, because you can get comfortable in an environment that allows you to do certain things. And so I'm not the best one at that, but there's a friend of mine who's really good. He always interviews every 18 to 24 months. Doesn't mean he's taking the job. I don't have the time, but that's something he does. And I think it's a good thing to think about. The other thing, as Christy said, I always give the advice. I tell people to go into a job bank and put their dream title and look at what is asked as the skill set required in the job description and have a real honest assessment with where your resume is right now.
That's great advice.
And figure out. So I just say go into any job bank and look at it. And with most of my mentors, then people I mentor, then I sit down with that and have an honest conversation where their gaps are and why was this the dream title that you put in. And I think that's one way for you to know where you want to go. Again, not something I do for myself. I'm better at advising than following my own advice. So
I think it goes back to one of the reasons that people leave companies or move on to companies. And I can completely empathize with Deborah, who's been there, and every day may be different, and definitely every year and every generation and every decade in the industry. It's all about, I think, personal growth. And I think one of the questions that I ask back after I'm asked is, what's the motive? What's the engine behind this desire to go to the next level? And I think that sometimes people are really concerned about titles or hierarchies, and I love the lateral because it's actually about your growth. It's about your personal development. It's about the skills you're gaining. It's the impact you're making in the organization. And sometimes what we did today is so much bigger than what we did yesterday that a demotion can be great, because I think that in most companies, the first 10 that start the company may not be the last 10 that run the company. And they just may be, and I actually ask myself on a daily basis, I think I'm underqualified for my job, right? So I think it's actually the other way around about, are we growing, are we developing, and what is the drive? And most of my moves, which is, shifting, is actually not because I had finished what I was doing, not because I didn't like what I was doing, not because my company shrunk. I think that happened once. That something happened. Something happened, and something happened is the way life just sort of flowed in moving from countries, companies being acquired, and having that flexibility sometimes to go with the flow and take some risk versus the goals that I set for myself 2 years ago was to go and do X. And this is far from X, so maybe I won't do it. So I think with all the career planning that one could have, I would love to add a dimension of risk-taking and a little bit of going with the flow. And the only decisions that I'm worried about are those which are irreversible. And there are not a lot of those in our lives. And a lot of them we can say, okay, we'll do this for 2-3 years. And if, God forbid, it didn't work out, it's okay. I think I did one when I was a software engineer. And in my first 5-6 years of my career, I was writing code. And I started drifting to project management and product marketing. And I remember the day that I got a Mac instead of my Sun workstation. And I cried. Because I said, I know. I said, sorry, what was that?
With joy.
No. No, not with joy. It was a moment that I knew this is a career move that's irreversible. Okay, I'm going to go to product marketing. I'm going to hang out with the marketing. We're going to do product definition. I'm going to shift away from technology. I won't remember the next programming language. I wasn't that great, probably, anyways. But I knew that, and then I said, this is it. This is an irreversible move. But there are very few of those. So those we should lose sleep on, and the others we should just take. And I think I would be, in 5 out of the 6 companies I think that I worked for, I would probably easily stayed there for 23 years if just something didn't happen. So I think it's not only about planning, it's also about being receptive of opportunities and trying things out if it's driven by your spouse or by your kids or by other needs, that things just happen, and we should be willing to take those.
So talking about risk, one of the things I know some of the panelists, but others I did not know. Aliza and I have been a nonprofit board before together, so I thought I would go to people's Facebook accounts. And 2 of the panelists, I couldn't find Facebook accounts. You know who you are. Deborah had the best. You can never have enough pairs of black shoes, so I was waiting to see her shoes. They're great-looking shoes. She really put herself out there. Cherie, a little bit. She was obviously excited about being engaged. That was on there. Nothing else about the fact that she worked at a record company or lived in, 8 continents or whatever. Aliza looked more like mine. Yes, I have a Facebook account. The other 2 of you...
Despite my better judgment.
You do. I couldn't find it. It must have been under that Microsoft name.
I do have one.
Okay, so I'll have to look it up again. Maybe
I posted on it today.
You did. What did you post on it today?
So I posted a picture of a crocodile tour we went on in Costa Rica. I thought it was a great picture.
You might have had the best Facebook account. So the question is, how much of yourself do you put out there? I mean, how much risk do you take in sort of, clearly everybody's really polished on this panel, and has a great sense of humor, but how, this is a big question that women have, especially earlier in their career, is how much can you be yourself? Or do you have to sort of adopt this sort of business persona like, or not? Or can you just be like Deborah and Susan's Facebook account I didn't see? Purnima, we're going to get you working on this, where I can tell how many pairs of shoes I have and whatever. So.
I can start there, and I know that if my boss hears this, it's not going to be a very good thing. But the reason why I don't have a Facebook account, and I might be among
It's okay.
No, I understood. I mean, my dad has one, which is kind of sad, and texts me to say that he's posted, and I should actually log in using his password so I can see what he's posted, which is all true. But the reason I don't have is that I started out as a one of these activist journalists in college, etc., where keeping things current and being at the making sure that you keep things current was a very important thing. I didn't think I could keep my Facebook page current, and there's nothing as bad as like a dead account. You see what I mean? Like a page. And so it's about
right,
much.
That's not a really good excuse.
And I understand. No, it is. No, I understand. And so, but I want to give two. But I want to give this as an example of two things.
We have a self-help group here. We'll help you.
Thank you.
I'll mentor you on Facebook.
So there's two things that I want to point out about this. One is that you're sort of making a judgment call of what's okay. And you do that even at work. I mean, I don't have a Facebook account because I decided before I even had a Facebook account that I wouldn't keep it current. And I think we all do that, and I think women are harder on themselves about these things. It's a very good example of how we think. And so when a position comes open, whether we say, am I qualified? Will I put up my hand and say, this is something I can do? I think this is a real thing, and I think you should take that as an example. And I know Anne doesn't take my excuses, but that's real, right? It's true. The second thing, which is something that when you say put out there, here's another little story. Early in my career, I was working with this bunch of guys who were very successful and obviously high testosterone, and the meetings used to be like, people would get into each other's faces, and sometimes I felt I couldn't be heard. And so one day I was talking to this friend of mine who was also in this meeting, and usually, when you're in tech companies, you're the only woman half the time in meetings, etc. And
Really?
well, this doesn't seem like it, which is good. So I turned to Mike and I said, maybe I have to change my tone or I have to get heard. And he said something that I've always remembered. He said that when you speak is the only time that the decibel level lowers and people at least stop to pause. Mm-hmm. You can get caught up in the noise, right? So I have believed that being authentic is important. I'm myself. It is what you see is what you get, even though you don't see my Facebook page. but that's what it is. So those are my two things. One is, don't make the excuse before you even try. And second, be yourself.
And Susan, do you look at other people's Facebook accounts when you're interviewing and can you just be a girl at Google?
So I haven't thought of checking people's Facebook accounts before I interview them, but that's a great idea.
Oh God, now there's going to be an even more intense interview process at Google.
Look what you started.
But I think there are a few things. For me, Facebook and your public profile, I think the challenges have to do more with your position than it does with your gender. Mm-hmm. And so I have both the opportunity and the challenge that lots of people friend me, and some of them are good friends, and some of them are a partner or someone that I don't know as well. And so as a result, I feel it's a little bit harder for me to really kind of be me on my Facebook page. But as much as possible, I try to, at least with my good friends and when I'm interacting with people, my style is generally to be open and to be transparent and to tell them what I'm thinking and what what issues I have, and so I try to be as transparent as I think is appropriate. But I love socializing and seeing what everyone's up to and hearing their stories, and I think it's a really fantastic way to keep in touch with a lot of people.
And Cherie, just one twist on while you answer this is that clearly you have a little fun and spunk in your Facebook account, so I imagine you're like that at work. Can you add also in, because before we get to Q&A, what it was like coming from the record industry, to the software industry, and how did you stay the same persona? Did you have to make adjustments, or have you always just been Cherie?
I think Cherie stayed the same. The clothing changed. Well, let me just say the record industry when I was there was, I was there during a very tumultuous time for anyone that's worked in that industry before, when the digital...
we funded Napster, so we're well aware.
Okay, yeah, it was during the Napster period, so it was a very traumatic time.
She helped you move to Microsoft.
That's right. But actually, I do have a point about Facebook, and I'm studying currently to become a psychotherapist. And I'm intrigued by social media and what it's doing to sort of our behaviors as humans. And I think to a large degree I get challenged with the question, how much of you do you present on Facebook? It really sort of starts to beg the question around how we show up as authentic people and how we choose to show up. So I personally struggle with my own dilemma of sometimes being an extrovert, but most of the time, just kind of buckling down, and I enjoy those moments. So I started to see patterns in how people use Facebook. A lot of my extroverted friends use it as a vehicle to communicate and get out there and feel alive and present, whereas a lot of people that aren't that way inclined, it doesn't mean that they are scared of their profile or they don't want to present themselves to the world. They just choose not to use that vehicle to do that. So I think we've got to be careful around how we think about the social media. It doesn't mean that that you're scared of being out there in the public. I think it just means you choose not to use it.
I'd like to really add on that because it's a dimension that I look at it completely different about the Facebook, and it's got nothing to do with willing to share or not. I'm very extrovert. I'm very loud. I'm very sociable. I have a lot of friends. What you see is what you get, and I'm not afraid of sharing anything, the good, the bad, the ugly, the ups, the downs, and the works. For me, it's part of the all we were talking about. It is, I stayed away from it for a long time. I was resistant because my first encounter was when my son was obsessed about it, and I just couldn't believe what a freaking waste of time it was, excuse my language. And I saw the emotional about, how many friends does he have, and who's contacting him, and how many messages, and it was that, he was a teenager at the time. And I just couldn't believe the amount of hours, and I timed the amount of...
Is this before he got on Farmville or anything like that?
Yeah. So I was very resentful, I have to admit. And then, and it goes to the all. It's a very, if you want to do it well, or if you want to really leverage, if you want to enjoy, I find it to be incredibly time-consuming, and I can hardly handle my inbox. And so I didn't do it. And then when I finally signed up, I didn't even put my name. I didn't want anyone to find me, because I didn't want to get messages from kids from high school and from primary school, and I'm just already behind, and I wake up in the morning and I'm behind, and now you were the love of my life in 7th grade, so
That's what I like. Yeah.
I was really worried, and I still am about it. It took me, I didn't even have my name. And the reason that I went into Facebook, and also my mother also, and she's 83, she has a Facebook account, and she communicates with my kids. So it's a little bit, I'm out of the loop. What was the article in the New York Times?
Out of the loop.
Out of the loop, so I'm out of the loop. The reason that I went into it is something about employing, right? And what's the next generation of employees? Yeah. And what are the tools? And then I looked at my son, who was a teenager and was obsessed, and then he somehow matured and he grew up and he's graduating from college. And then I realized this is the generation that's coming into the workforce. And I better know. What are they doing? How do they expect to communicate? How do they expect to share? What tools am I as an employer supposed to give them in terms of online and real time and interfaces and social? And so I just really went in to learn. And it really, I look at it very pragmatically, and it has nothing to do with my personality. But it's really interesting. It is, and it has a lot of implications on how we're all going to engage in the future. So I think it's more of a learning opportunity than a way to express or publish myself.
So I started with that in mind. Social media, I'm a marketeer, and so social media is a huge marketing opportunity. And so I started with the idea of, well, I'm going to just dive right in and see what happens. And it's a blast. It's really, I think it's like it's like my meditation. I'm just going to go to my Facebook account and play around in there for a while. And
Everybody's going to friend you after
I
this.
know. And I don't do Farmville or Mafia Wars.
Right.
But what I found is that there's just back to the community. There's people that I want to communicate with and who want to hear from me. And so just over time, it's just become a fun little playground for me, and it gets bigger because it gets bigger. That by nature it's viral. But it started very much with I really want to learn this medium and really want to understand how to use it from a professional perspective. And I wound up just loving it and just thinking it's really fun.
So before Karen gets to this, and as my dad would say, we sort of have to hustle now. But let's just go quickly, and before we get to Q&A, and everyone can tell us their most memorable workday. Oh. It can be good or bad.
Ever?
Ever. Cherie, I know your memorable work day because you told us that story at the Scotch and the Cigarettes. The record company one?
Oh, I don't know if I'm allowed to tell it. I might get in trouble. My interview?
Yeah, you don't need to say which company.
My first day on a job at a very well-known company in London. The company will remain nameless. I walked into the office with the CEO, and he pulled out a chair and he said, "Cherie, it's great to meet you. What would you like to drink?" And I said, "Oh, you know, I'll have a glass of water." He said, "Well, I've got gin, I've got scotch, I've got whiskey, I've got a martini." He basically poured me a cocktail and then proceeded to light a cigarette and offered me a cigarette. And I obviously could not believe it. So I said, "Of course I'll have a gin and tonic." And I said, "Well, I only smoke when I drink." So no, so that actually was the most shocking experience. But needless to say, my relationship with him moved pretty quickly into a trusted relationship. And I got to learn sort of some interesting behaviours in terms of how the executives of that company operated.
Susan,
Memorable.
any memorable days from when you were the garage lord?
So I actually didn't work there as the garage lord. I was just the landlord. I mean, and there were a lot of memorable days from then. But I mean, I guess I would have to say, like, for me, one of the most memorable days was our acquisition of DoubleClick, because I was a big supporter of that. And I mean, I pretty much went out there and said we should do it, and I made a very strong argument, you know, and then we did it. And I was on the analyst call, and you know, I went home and said, "Oh my gosh, the company just spent $3 billion."
That's a memorable day.
That was a very memorable day for me, and a very significant one. And I felt better when I saw Microsoft bought Atlas for $6 billion. So I thought, "Oh, we got a deal." So that was another memorable day.
Aliza?
You know, that's a real tough one. That's a real tough one. And the way you asked it, I started thinking about the positive. You know, the most memorable, the most impactful, the most exciting. And I have to admit that I can't think of one. Not one. I can think of gazillions. Yeah. I can't think of only one that stands out. You know, it's been phenomenal, and it's really been a great and exciting journey that I think that every day has brought something to it. And then I said, well, maybe I should look for a bad one. There weren't a hell of a lot of those either.
But there was one.
I don't think there may have been a couple, and I think it's interesting. It has to do actually with maybe if I'm really forced to think about it, it had to do with the days.
Now, Cherie's studying psychotherapy. Should she tell us about this?
She's listening very carefully. But I think it has to do with, I guess, the days that I left companies, right? So whether it wasn't, whether I was just sad to see a big piece of my life moving because whatever, or whether it was parting from an industry or technology or a family, and I believe very much in the family side. So I think those were the more memorable ones, the ones that that actually were an ending of something. And I think I've got very good friends left from every single company that I've worked in, but I think those were hard days. Even if I had made the choice and I thought it was the great thing and I thought it was the right thing, and it was saying, well, those partings were probably much harder than the beginnings of new stuff.
Purnima, Deborah?
Well, you sort of stole my answer. I think it's always memorable when you're making transitions for all the reasons that you point out, because most of the time my transitions have been I started a company when I was still in college in my little town. I left to come to the US. So there's always excitement about the next thing, but there is always something that you're leaving behind. And then my next job out of grad school here, I left to go to business school. So there is excitement, but there is always you're leaving something behind. I think those transitions always stand out for all the reasons that you pointed out. And the only other day that comes to mind is in the startup that I joined after business school. we were actually pushing the boundaries of physics to know whether even the bytes would move from point A to point B. And to be very honest, I didn't understand all of it, but when the engineers jumped up and down and said the bytes actually moved from point A to point B, I think there was a certain amount of relief, but also there was a certain amount of excitement. And so I think that was the other day that stands out.
I struggle with picking one because there's a flood of them. One, though, that did stand out for me was in the mid-'90s. I was in running marketing in Asia Pacific, and we brought our CEO to China for the first time, which is a man named Andy Grove. And I'd worked for Andy for a long time before I was in Asia, but this was his first trip there. And we had several days together, and at the end, it was him taking me aside and telling me about how thrilled he was with the trip. And Andy can be a little grumpy sometimes, so this was actually a good thing that he was happy with things. But he was describing for me all the things he had learned. And that was very fulfilling for me, for someone who I had learned so much from, that here I was on the other side and, young and completely naive and innocent. And he was sharing with me the things that I was able to open up for him. And that was very moving and very satisfying for me, because I felt like I was, again, it's that, do I have an impact? Am I making a difference? So that's high on my list.
Well, before we go to Q&A, I think contrary to the New York Times article, we have a lot of women here who are definitely in the loop, if not running the loop, at $3 billion pieces at a time or $6 billion pieces. So before Q&A, can we give a hand of applause to our panelists? And I guess how this works is if anyone has a question, just raise your hand, and the mic will come to you, and let's get going. Let's hustle. One right here.
What do you look for when hiring candidates?
Shoes.
Would you ever hire me? I'm the only one with my sort of loafers.
Well, I'll start with. Go ahead. I mean, one thing we look for, which I'm curious actually if others do too, but I think because the nature of technology is one that's changing so quickly, we aren't often looking for specific expertise. We're not looking for people saying like, I've done this for 10 years, because there just aren't people who have done this for 10 years. And although we might be doing it this year, we probably won't be doing it next year because our business is changing so quickly. So a lot of times we're looking for people who just have the raw ability to learn things really quickly, have the skill sets, if it's a technical role, have the technical skill sets, and the ability and interest to be able to adapt and learn really quickly.
I'll just add one very similar comment. Curiosity, and not feeling like you need to know all the answers, but actually asking a lot of questions too. Yeah. That give and take, that inquisition is to me is very important.
Yeah, and so there is definitely the things that both folks have talked about here. The two other things I would add is commitment. If you've come to interview and you don't know what's the latest thing that has happened, and you haven't even read the last thing that came out on the news, right. I don't know how interested you are in this job. So I usually pick to see what they've kept pace of either the company itself or the competition. And the other thing is cultural fit. You can get the best person, but if it's not a fit, it doesn't work. Yeah. You have to have cultural fit.
I would echo all of those things. And another thing that, particularly for more senior people moving into senior roles, it's self-awareness. The real ability to say, here's what I'm good at, and here's where, there are days where I struggle here, and here's what I'm doing to work on that. And so that, for me, the representation of awareness of what they're good and where there are areas to grow is a big factor.
Next question.
Hi there. My name is Rima Mutreja. I'm with Microsoft. Hi. So I've been with Microsoft for 3 years, and one of the things that I've observed that all of you have been change agents. I see myself as a change agent. I've been very successful. 3 years, got the Microsoft Circle of Excellence Award at MGX, and I'm often seen as a heretic in my organization for sort of leading with the future and saying, this is not working, guys. You got to stop and say, things have got to change. How do you really effectively go from a heretic to a true change agent and lead with that future in mind?
Well, I would argue you already are a change agent. And you've been awarded for it. So, within Microsoft, and that's, one of the qualities we look for, and that's also something we interview for, is, what do you stand for? What's important to you? Where do you want to see change? So I would say it's inherent in what we look at from a talent perspective, but
People are intimidated by that. So how do you influence the rest of the organization? Somebody's so intimidated.
I was going to make a comment about, you've answered it, I think, implicit in your follow-up. Can you lead?
Yeah.
And being a change agent isn't just someone who has an idea. It's can you lead others and help others understand, and can you be a change agent in the sense of laying out a plan that's actionable? We can all come up with really great ideas, but if you can't really execute on them, then they're just great ideas. And so being a change agent is as much about inspiring others through leadership, as well as giving people some sense of what are the steps that we need to go through together, and being open to everyone's ideas. As a change agent, you're not just the only person who has the best idea, but you might be someone who has a skill or a capability to lead others through that change.
The other piece I would point out is that, you phrased something as saying, this does not work. The minute you say that, you're putting somebody on the defensive who's doing this, whatever that this is. A much better way is to say, how about this, and paint a future, and get people inspired about the future vision, and then say you're going from point A to point B, and that's where you get your action plan, right? So paint a future, get people to buy into that future before you say something doesn't work.
I just have to add a quote, if it's okay, that I heard the other day, which flies in a slight different view of this, which is, the new term of leadership is disappointing people at a rate they can handle.
I think it's at the level at which you are.
That's
yes.
right.
Yeah. At certain levels, yes, that's absolutely the thing to do. Yeah.
For you basketball fans out there, a long time ago, there used to be such a thing as a player coach. I mean, the coaches could go out there and play. They got rid of that very early in the history of basketball because it didn't work. So as you grow in your career, you find that you're managing people, and telling them what to do does not work. You have to teach versus tell. And if you can stand back from what you're doing and say, am I teaching or am I telling? It may help you a lot.
If I could just add an angle about the action plan and leading to a new direction or on a new angle. Even if you don't say this doesn't work or something's very broken, and I've used the term, by the way, something's broken many, many times in my life, but I do think that sometimes it's also being a little bit humble about what is the right way, how engaging other ideas about the right way, and also being less of a perfectionist about the plan that you have in place. Sometimes to be a real change agent, and I felt that I worked in a company, and I classified myself and my team as change agents in a slow, large, moving company. Reaching sometimes half the change or half the goals is also hell of a good. Right? So the bigger the problem or the slower the group, being willing to accept not the perfect, but just a few degrees, and over time, is important, because otherwise it's a lot of frustration and you'll become impatient. But as far as recognizing what's wrong, it's also important to recognize A, that there's multiple ways of getting to what's right, and B, it may not take you exactly how you outlined it to yourself in your dreams.
Or you can just get a big boulder in your backyard and practice moving it around. All right, next question.
That's a good one.
I've noticed none of you are CEOs yet. And I guess my question is, do
I have no desire to be CEO. Honestly, I think it's the loneliest job on the planet in a company the size of Intel. And I'm very good friends, and I think we have the best CEO on the planet. But it's a really tough job. For me, where I get my thrill is helping the CEO or being part of a small team that's really kind of moving the company in a new direction. But to be CEO of the company I work for isn't a desire at all. And I don't know, maybe a smaller company at some point, but I'm not driven that way. It just doesn't. It's not what I get up in the morning to go do.
So I'll answer that by saying there are people who I've worked with as peers who have left and gone and are CEOs at companies. And I think, for me, the most important thing to think is like, am I enjoying, am I learning, am I doing a great job in the business that I'm doing? And I'm just not a very title-driven person in general.
Yeah.
Like if it happened to be there was a cause or a company I believed in and I had that opportunity, I would, be happy to do it. But where I am right now, I feel the amount of impact that I have running the monetization and the ads for such a large company like Google is where I am happy being right now. But I always think that there are we're all always growing, and there are always lots of opportunities in the future. But I don't really know what those will be right now.
Anyone else?
I just think it was a brilliant question. And I think it may be a subset. It just happens to be that we're 5, and we've heard from 3, or at least 2, and I don't necessarily have that aspiration. And I think it's got to do with your satisfaction of where you are right now and the journey that you've had today. And have you ever felt frustrated that, I could have gotten something else done if I was the CEO? And the answer is no. And it's about working with a team and enabling others and providing a platform for the team to grow. But it's not. Don't conclude from the sample that it's true for all women, or that they're women who don't want to be. And I do know and have been around women who that definitely was their goal, whether they were qualified or not. That's that's another question. But I just think it was a very, very good observation, and maybe the psychotherapist analyst can say, in general, it's a fair question. As a gender, are we happy with the supporting and enabling and the pushing and the bouldering and role, even when we get to the very, very, very senior top? The only time that I've had the aspiration is that I do think that one day I may get off the track of the fast pace and the very high tech and the very innovative companies, and I have this idea maybe I'll have my own little business. But it's at the realm of, wouldn't it be nice to have a little cafe? Right? So then I want to be the CEO. I think, and then I won't be alone because I'll schmooze with my customers and there'll be lots of espressos and But I did think of even in my 20s, I thought one day I'm going to have a travel agency. I did think about the little business sort of as my long when I'm really off on the track that I'm on. But I think it has to do with your satisfaction of where you are today.
Yeah, and I have a slightly different story. I started by founding a company, right? So it's sort of almost gone the other way around. And so it's back to what Susan said. I think I'm not a person who's had a career goal and a linear path. I've just taken the opportunity that has motivated me to pick the next thing. And I've met women. As you said, one of my mentors at Bell Atlantic, which is Verizon right now, told me very clearly, I was an engineer at that time, that she knew when she was in her junior year in college that she wanted to be a CIO of a Fortune 100 company. And not a CTO, not a CEO, a CIO. And every decision she made, every job decision that came, she said, am I getting one step closer?
Wow.
And I thought, oh my God, I have no idea what I want to be. That was my first reaction. And so if you ask me even 5 years ago, would I be in this job, I wouldn't know. If you asked me even 8 months ago, would I be in this job, I didn't know. This is, I'm new to this role. So, but one thing that I've done is when an opportunity has come, I've jumped into it if it's excited me.
Any words from the psychotherapist?
I'm ruminating on the question because where it leads me, actually, the question leads me to think it would be an interesting study if we asked a group of men up here. And again, this is not about men or women. It's more what drives and motivates, and is it? I'd be really curious to know the difference between what the panel would say with a different gender up here. So I'm just pondering.
I've got an answer for my sample of the last 30 plus years.
And also not only that, what would they think is the right answer to give?
I think it's that.
Yes,
Yeah.
I truly think
would
it's
never
what would
say,
they
"No, I
think is
don't
the
wanna
right
be."
answer to give
Right.
among peers who they think are equally
But
competitive.
I think it's really important to say the CEO of what,
Yes.
Yeah.
right? I mean, I could be the CEO of like my own like little
World.
like, yeah, cafe. I mean, there's like a million different opportunities out there. So I do think it's not just title, and I think any group up here would have to say CEO of what.
Yeah.
Well, the other thing that happens is I can guarantee you that all of our panelists get calls from headhunters, and many of those job offers are, we have a CEO spot available. So, it also, the more prominent you get in your own career, whatever your title is, people can see from the outside how accomplished you are. And so you always know that's available to you because you're getting calls and asking if you want to do that. You don't need to, it's just the difference between sort of, well, do you want to be a CEO? The confidence level here is like, no, I don't need to say I'm going to be a CEO to prove to you that I'm accomplished in my career. That's the point that you were making. But everyone here, if they wanted to be a CEO of companies of many sizes, I don't know if Aliza's qualified for the cafe role, but
The barista.
barista, yeah, no, definitely the software role. But so there is something that happens in your career where if you have a big role and grow in that role, you're constantly getting called from recruiters and headhunters, and so somebody else outside of you is making an assessment and sort of giving you a little sort of pat on the shoulder. It's not even inside your company and saying, if you'd be willing to talk to me, we think you'd be perfect for this role. So that also comes into the mix as you progress in your career.
Great point.
Next question?
So one of the questions that I had was, if you've seen the Catalyst studies, they say that female employees generally make 70% of what men do, and that extends, that differential extends to the executive level. So I've been at my own company for 13 years. It's a Fortune 100 company, and the ways in which I've employed to make sure that I'm compensated fairly or in line with my peers is to along the lines of what one of the panelists suggested was actually talk to headhunters, interview from time to time to understand what your market what the market rate is going for your position. Another strategy is to actually have a buddy, either at your own firm or at a competitor, firm to understand, what sort of compensation is, is standard. And a third strategy is to actually, in addition to interviewing, talking to headhunters and whatnot. I guess, what sort of strategies have you employed to address that, or, has that even been a focus for you?
I'll dive in here first. Having been at when you're in a large company for a long time, you sort of just assume your managers are taking care of you, because that's what managers are supposed to do. And quite a ways into my career, I was surprised to find out that I was really off compared to my peers. And it wasn't me that told me this, it was a new manager that I had who was presenting me with a very big raise. And I was thrilled with my very big raise. And he said, I think we're now getting you in line with your peers. And that was a very big lesson. And by that time, I was actually managing a large organization myself. But the lesson for me was, if I'm not paying attention, then it's my own damn fault. And I just, I'm one of these people that I think if I'm doing a good job, people will recognize it and they'll compensate me the way that, that they think is best. which is fine, and I'm not saying that that wasn't the case, but if I'm not paying extra attention to what I think is fair, or if I'm not just asking the basic question of my manager, please take a look, just make yourself aware of what the compensation looks like, and if you think that I'm being compensated commensurate with my peers, especially at a place like Intel where we have this thing called meritocracy. It really is about how you're doing relative to your peers. And I just sort of just put my own trust in that the system will figure it out. And that's just not the case. You really have to be the steward of your own compensation or your own development, or it's not just about money. It's really about the whole big package. And I can assure you that ever since then I've been asking the question, am I being compensated, to the level that I think my boss would want me to be?
Yeah, I guess as a follow-up, so self-advocacy was
Right.
the third strategy. To what extent have you actively?
Well, and I find that I don't want to overgeneralize this, but for women, it's hard to be a self-advocate sometimes. We're not as, and again, I don't want to overgeneralize here, but for me, and certainly a lot of the women that I work with or that have worked for me, it's hard to toot your own horn and to say, look how great I am and I want to raise. There's that extra effort that we have to go through to get to that point, I find, compared to a lot of the male counterparts. But you have to do it. That's just the way it works. And if you don't do it, then you should learn how to do it, or just get over it and figure out how to make sure that you're taking care of yourself.
Yeah, that was what I was going to add to. It's not just about the what. I mean, everything that you talked about is data collection. I think most people lose in the how. There was a time that I had negotiated raises for my entire team. Mm-hmm. And then when I went and talked, and they said, oh, you just got a raise 8 months ago, you're doing a great job, etc. And it sounded logical to me, and I said, yeah, that sounds good. Right? You have to play it out. Just to give you data, they did a study of the top 10 business schools, people graduating and their packages. And what they found was that the guys graduating made 30 to 35% more, not because these firms were paying differently. It's because they asked for all kinds of things. Mm-hmm. Things that were not within the realm. And most women were okay because they did the what study, like you're saying. They did the research to say, consulting, I'm coming out, I'll find out what it is, what will McKinsey pay, whatever else. And they were good at figuring that out. But they didn't ask for relocation, all those kinds of things which are nebulous. There's a lot of nebulousness in compensation. So play it out with somebody before you go in for the conversation, and also realize what the degrees of freedom are. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, it doesn't work.
So we've got time for one last question.
So my question, is this on? So my question is actually a two-part question that would be interesting to hear either or both parts. And the question comes from my point of view, not inside any of these companies, but as an outsider. I'm a consultant, and I work with the top leadership of some of your companies doing visuals on the walls. So I'm writing, and I worked with you, Cherie, in Seattle. Yes, hi. And so what I'm doing is coming in, and I'm doing something very, I would say, sort of feminine. I'm sort of drawing. It's got an emotional quality to it. And I work a lot with high-tech companies.
And what is the question?
And
I'm getting the hustle.
I understand completely. So the question, and I understand what you're asking, but I think that this is a delicate question, and it has to do with if there were more women involved, and is there a difference when you have women involved in product design and in services, in your organizational, how you put the organization together? If there were more women involved, how would it be different? And how are you getting more women involved in the high-tech field?
Susan?
Well, I'll just start by saying that we try really hard to recruit women to Google. And we have we are actively trying to get women in technical fields across the board. And I think there are challenges just because there aren't as many women graduating with technical degrees, and so that presents an overall challenge. But I think we have done a good job of recruiting women. And one insight I'll say that actually didn't come from me, it actually came from our founders early on, which was they believed that it was important to have women from the very beginning of the company. Because for multiple reasons, which were, that if you want to have a diverse group, which produces a better company in the end, no women's going to want to come and join a company of like 100 men and just going to look at it and be like, well, what's wrong here? Why would I join this company? So they understood early on, and I think it's really important to try to preserve that throughout the process and the lifetime of the company. So that's sort of one thing I say. I don't really know if our processes would be different or if our products would be different if the gender balance was different. I feel like we try to hire the best people across the board, irrespective of gender, and we are very collaborative in our work process. And so as a result, there are multiple people who are touching the products. I can't really say if they'd be different or not. Mm-hmm. My guess is it'd be very similar.
I know for a fact that our products would be different because we make mobile phones. Mm-hmm. And both in terms of design, how people look and feel, touch it, it's a consumer product. Mm-hmm. And I think it would be different. We are engaging more women, just like Susan says. I think there is definite outreach. I've always tried to recruit women. I just don't get resumes. It's difficult. Mm-hmm. I mean, we've been trying very hard to see if there are more female resumes. I don't even get resumes. That is this thing. However, what we do is then go and look at women consumers and get input from the outside rather than have input on the inside. I think it would be very different if we had more women, not so much as processes per se, but in terms of design concepts and what you can get.
And I'm maybe the opposite of that, which is I don't know that our products would be different. We make chips. Chips are chips. But how we market them and what we illuminate in terms of what they are designed to do definitely changes when you look at just demographics in general. And it's not just women, it's Generation Y or young adults or emerging markets versus mature markets. It's the diversity, I think, that is the real benefit of having a variety of people, gender as well as ethnicity, involved in a lot of the development or design or marketing decisions that we make, because you just get different perspectives. It just also makes more a fun work environment. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, it just makes it just more interesting when you've got a lot of different points of view. And women definitely have a different perspective than men, and that's actually, quite enjoyable.
Yeah, I would speak to, well, first of all, the crying shame that there aren't enough women in technology. I think that's common, and I know Microsoft's very passionate about doing what we can to educate right down to sort of high school age girls. But the thing I have observed is the difference between a product group meeting when you have a PM lead or a dev lead or a test lead that's a woman versus a group of men in dev, test, and PMs. And the nature of the conversation, again, my experience sitting in different meetings, it's just slightly different. Right. And so sometimes the nature of the dialogue is different. So do more ideas get injected when women are in the room? I can't say. But the nature of how the work gets done, I think, is different. So I think there's a lot to learn about how to create an inclusive culture that isn't just about women. It's about bringing other cultural perspectives into the dialogue and creating a more of a way that we work, creating a different way that we work versus you must get it done by a certain time. Right. So.
Well, again, I want to thank everybody for coming here tonight, and especially thanks to our sponsors in the Churchill Club, but most of all to our 5 panelists. You heard what their 24 hours are like, so they've lost their 9 p.m. spot in about 20 minutes, so we've got to hustle them home. So thanks again, everybody. Thank you so much. It was great.
I too would like to thank our panelists for sharing their perspectives and stories and wisdom so freely. And Anne, thank you so much for delivering a stimulating conversation. As a small token of our appreciation, we would like to present you with the ceremonial Churchill Club t-shirt. And thanks again to Microsoft and to all of you for coming. We'll see you again soon.